name is Prumsodun Ok. I am the first American-born child of Cambodian peasant farmers who were displaced here after the brutal Khmer genocide, which killed off nearly a quarter of the population, and included in that number were 90% of Cambodian artists and intellectuals. And so I began my training in Cambodian classical dance with Sophiline Shapiro, who is the leading choreographer in Cambodian dance, before studying with experimental filmmaking giants such as Ernie, Gehr, and George Kuchar, among others. But I've studied with composers, I've studied with Peter Sellars, and so I really feel like I approach art making in a total sense, and especially since being a Cambodian classical dancer in the diaspora, I don't have access to mature classical dancers. I don't have access to musicians of the highest caliber, and so those were never options for me in the creative process. And so I've really had to learn how to use my limitations as possibilities in order to touch a beauty of the highest integrity. And so what you're going to see is actually an interdisciplinary work called Of Land and Sky, and what I'm doing is I'm mining the pre-Khmer Rouge pop culture that my parents loved and that I despised as a young boy. But after my father passed away on my 25th birthday this past year, and after that I've just learned to love things from my childhood, so it mines that cultural space, but also the space of the tradition of Cambodian classical dance, and specifically as an artist, I'm really inspired by the ritual function of Cambodian dance. Mm-hmm. It was developed over 1,000 years ago as a means of inspiring health and well-being and prosperity in the practitioner, the environment, and the audience. And certainly, if you think about the Hindu origins of theater, theater was art and theater in this case. It was a form of knowledge that was given to human beings from the gods as a means of finding truth and transcendence in a decaying world. And certainly the first performance was an extremely political one, in which these human actors presented a performance in which the gods triumphed over the demons, and after that they were threatened to be killed, and they eventually secured knowledge of the rituals that would keep them safe on stage. And so, as an artist, I always think about that story of performance is always political, and then the second thing is the stage is a sacred space. It's a sanctioned space. It's and any act to censor is demonic. But so Of Land and Sky really draws upon these two cultural spaces to explore, one, my personal experience, and then to use my personal experience as a means of speaking to the larger issues in our society. And so for myself, as a young gay man, it's weird when you're driving through the streets and you hear on the radio about how people don't understand your love, and how it's not accepted and how it's taboo, and in your head you're just thinking like, well, my love is just as real, as virtuous as anyone else's, and so what I'm doing is I'm retelling a Buddhist myth, and really looking at that myth in a cross-cultural context. So I'm looking at two Cambodian versions of it. I'm looking at a Japanese version of it, and then also a Japanese anime version of it, and really drawing details and plots from each of those myths and weaving it into one big interdisciplinary performance. And in the meantime, I'm really examining issues of femininity, for both myself as a gay man, but also of women in general, looking at issues of beauty, being a classical dancer, every little scar, every little mistake is so, you beat yourself up with it,
Right.
and then also looking at that idea of transgressive love, and love that's so virtuous, but at the same time that it really pushes the things around it. And so for me, I've been contemplating this idea of a fearless love, and I think that's something that I want to have in all of my performances.
And so you take the tale and it's a god and a mortal.
Yes.
In love,
Yes.
two males, and then you surround them with, it's described as intergenerational females.
Yes.
So can you talk a little more about how they intersect?
Yeah, so this performance was actually inspired by a film clip from 1960s Cambodia. So this is like before the genocide, and really it was seen as like a second golden age in Cambodian history. Like artists and musicians and intellectuals were extremely active, and I mean, by international standards, like the video is nowhere near, like, it's nowhere of like international like weight and significance, but and it's told in its a heterosexual fashion, and so for me, as a young gay man and as a young Asian gay man, oftentimes Asian men are feminized in gay perceptions. Like, for example, me being young, small-framed, that automatically makes me the bottom in a relationship, makes me embody the feminine. And so I wanted to reclaim the feminine as an active agent. And certainly the feminine in Cambodian culture, in classical culture, is something very powerful. On the walls of Angkor Wat, which is the largest temple complex in the world, and it's in Cambodia, there are carvings of Devada, who are these guardian spirits, female guardian spirits, and none of them are wearing the same jewelry, none of them have the same hair, they're standing differently, and there's over 1,000 of them in this beautiful temple. And certainly the role of the dancer in classical Cambodia, where you were a bridge between heaven and earth. Mm-hmm. You were charged with performing these prayers and movement for the deliverance of well-being and fertility and prosperity. And so the dancing female body is a very powerful and active thing. And that's so different from contemporary Cambodia, where wives are being abused, where women abuse each other, where these standards of beauty and ideals are so limiting and constricting, and so for me, I chose very specifically to have an intergenerational and multicultural cast of women, because I wanted to celebrate the feminine in its truest sense, and celebrate a woman's body in its truest sense. So, what my youngest dancer is in her early 20s, and she's in every way, an example of beautiful youth. And then I have a dancer who's 60 years old, and I have dancers who are in their 40s. I have dancers who are in their 30s, and some of them are black, white, Asian, mixed race, and for me that's really important, having being Cambodian American and growing up in American society, which can sometimes be, I don't know, like, I don't turn on the TV and see images of people that look like myself, and certainly in gay culture and gay media, you don't see ads of young gay men who look like myself or think like myself, and so for me, creating a space for myself in that culture, in that society, means creating a space for everyone. So.
Wow. I'm tearing up. So, when in the description, it describes your work as refusing to dismantle the tradition, even as it challenges the constraints. And you described the tradition a little bit, but what are the restraints, and how have challenges maybe become more fun or interesting?
Yeah, it's really interesting because through some research I've come to learn that traditional Cambodia is actually a very recent construction, and it's very different from classical Cambodia, where women almost had an equal place to men. And so in relations to the dance, for example, the carvings that I mentioned of the Devada, of these women, they're all topless. And in classical Cambodia, women and men all went around topless, and everyone bathed naked in public without any sense of shame. And during that time period, the state religion was Brahmanism, Hinduism. But now Buddhism is the predominant religion, although there's elements of ancestor worship and animism, and Hinduism so ingrained in that Buddhism. But like for me now, I was talking to another reporter, and she was saying that the performance could be quote unquote debatable because I've chosen to have my dancers and everyone go topless, and in Cambodia that would not fly. Now. Wow. That would not fly, even though you have these images that are celebrated as images of beauty, as culture, as refinement, but if a woman were to do that now, today in Cambodia, she would be derided as a slut or a prostitute. And so for me, that would be a way of challenging. Or another way of challenging would just be the display of sexuality too. In Cambodia, it's really weird. Grown men can walk down the street holding hands. Grown women can walk down the street holding hands. They're best friends. But as soon as a wife or a husband, boyfriend, girlfriend, or boyfriend are holding hands in affection, it's a big no-no. And certainly in the dance, you really have to dig to just be like, oh, I think they just had sex, And so for me, like the display of sexuality is the display of sex, the display of sexuality is not like a means of trying to gain notoriety or anything. I don't do anything for that. I do things because I feel like they have meaning. But for me, it's a form of protest, and it's a form of celebration for being a young gay man in a society that can be, at times, really violent in its oppression. But at the same time, the things that I keep are the ritual function of the dance. And so, like, my dancers, my performers, none of them, are practitioners of Cambodian dance, but, we have conversations about, like, offerings that we need to make. We have conversations about, like, what do they do in their traditions, or what do they do in their practice, before a performance. And then I also really think about that story that I told you about. Like, why was art implanted here, according to the Hindu origins of theater? And what is the function of my dance, of my performance? It's to transform society for the better. It's to wake people whose eyes, even though they're open, are blind. It's to quake the illusions that we've allowed to ourselves to construct in our lives, and on that note, for example, like someone once described me as like, really pushing things, but also at the same time being extremely respectful at the same time. I met with a reporter from Voice of America, Khmer service, and she's Cambodian, and she was the one who described the performance as debatable.
Really?
And and because I think what she meant was, it could be controversial in Cambodia.
Okay. Okay.
And she was asking me, so like, what do you think about, Cambodians when they see this, and I said to her, first off, Cambodians aren't my only audience. And secondly, the dance is bigger than Cambodia. It's Cambodia's gift to the world. And the thing about gift giving is you can't have any expectations.
It's very, very wise.
And the second thing, the thing after that was my first audience are the guru, and guru is derived from the Sanskrit guru, which means one who disperses darkness. And so in this case, it can be your living guru, or it can be the spirits of deceased teachers who watch over the dance, who represent history, and certainly in our tradition there is an ultimate teacher spirit. We call him Lokta Mahasai, or our grandfather, the great ascetic, and he's actually the first human being to receive knowledge of the arts from the gods. And so in Cambodia, we have a mask of him, and he's always in the middle of the altar because he always acts as a judge. And before every performance before we stage any theatrical performance, we perform in ritual before this altar. And some of the dancers are afraid of this mask because they say, oh, he looks so critical, he looks so angry, he looks so mean. And then I look at that same mask and I say, well, but he looks so jovial and kind and friendly and loving. And so for me, when I'm pushing the tradition, one is I say, well, I have the power of history, I have the power of knowledge, and secondly is I'm gonna look at the crew, the ones who are witness to every performance, as people who love and people who care, and with that kind of and with that, I want to bring to the stage a fearless love that will make you do anything.
Yeah, that's a great way to wrap up. I'm gonna come over here for the, and now I understand the power of translation, because debatable, what I thought it meant versus controversial.
Yes.
That's interesting. Well, thank you very, very much. This is wonderful. And he's part of the Now Festival Week 2, which opens tomorrow night.
Yes.
Thursday, runs Thursday, Friday, Saturday. Quite a wonderful experience at REDCAT, and all the information is above if you're watching on Bitter Lemons, below if you're watching on YouTube. And I want to get all the inspirations you named. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.
Wow.